Thank you everybody for joining us on this Wednesday evening that is incredibly hot and humid here in Vermont for our third of the speaker series. The speaker series has been an aspect of Yes Tomorrow's offerings over the years, and it came back into practice a couple of years ago as a way to kind of offer free education and get people's minds turning on different concepts related to design and build, craftsmanship, and just creating the life that you want, I think, is a big part of it. So we're really excited to be able to have a lot more this season, a lot of local and alumni, as well as Jon is an alumni of Yes Tomorrow, to be able to give us an update on what he's been up to. You're able to ask questions, whether you're tuning in on Zoom or if you're tuning in on Facebook Live. I'll be monitoring the chat box for both of them. For those of you on Zoom, if you could use the Q&A box as opposed to the chat box, there's two options for you there. The question and answer box is a little bit easier for me to keep track of as people are asking questions, so I'd really appreciate that. And then for folks on Facebook, if you have questions that come up as the talk goes on, just enter as a comment on the live video. So with that, Jon, would you like to give you a little introduction to yourself?
Sure. Yeah, so hi everyone. I can't see you, but I hope that you're well. My name's Jon Turner. I operate Wild Roots Farm in Bristol, Vermont, and we are a 10-acre homestead operation that focuses on climate resilient food systems and food systems education. Majority of the work that we've done over the last few years has been primarily with college students and high school age students through service learning projects and internships and workshops, site visits and everything. But in the past, we've also done a lot of work with community members and military veterans and service members, various degrees. Real quick though, Rachel, there's a little bit of feedback. Is there any way to get rid of that?
I'm muted myself. Is that gonna?
Okay, I think that's better. Good, okay. Sorry about that, everyone. I'm not very tech savvy in that sense. And so, as Rachel mentioned, I am an alum of Yes Tomorrow. Back in 2013, I had just had my wife had just had our second child, and we were homesteading down in southern Vermont at the time, and it was something where I really wanted to invest more time and energy into understanding food and soil and how everything worked. And at the time, I was still very heavily involved with various veteran organizations through art making and starting to get into the Farmer Veteran Coalition. And a lot of that was to really understand the transitional process and the difficulties that many men and women had transitioning in and out of combat into the civilian life, and kind of like returning home to their family members. And so there's something about wanting to understand soil and food production to continue to provide for the community that was appealing. And so I'd heard about Yes Tomorrow, signed up for one of the courses, which unfortunately is no longer offered. It was the Certificate in Sustainable Building and Design. And my first introduction to Yes Tomorrow was a 3-week intensive course, Ecological Design in the Built Environment, the lead instructor was Andy Keller, and you know, the course itself was quite rigorous, but having someone be as constructively critical as he was really forced me to kind of view the landscape from a different perspective and to understand the impact that we as humans have on it, as well as the impact that the natural environment has on us, and how there shouldn't be any difference between us, but there really should be a lovely dovetail, which would allow us to move forward and have a better understanding of how to live healthy and vital lives. And so from that point, I used my GI Bill and took a number of courses. Myself and another veteran, you know, we took probably about every course there was to be offered at that time, and multiple certificates, which was great. And so moving forward from there, I was able to take the information obtained throughout these periods and apply it in real world time to land that we had just purchased in Bristol. And that was everything from designing a barn and in a home to also designing a food system. And so I had prepared something that I'd like to share and then kind of go into a little bit more of a background because it might all make sense. But over the last decade, I've had a lot of time to really think about food and our relationship to it and the impact that has on the community. And it's something that keeps me awake at night because I think in some situations people are very well off, and in others they're not. There's just food deserts and there's a lack of healthy sustenance available to them. And so it appears that the majority of our population has lost an intimate connection to food, to its origins, and the process that occurred between being sown, hatched, or raised, and to the finished meal. And with this disconnection, we have become reliant on others to make decisions that ultimately impact the health and vitality of a community. And dependent on our class, our privilege, and our value and worth, this decision-making process may or may not benefit the greater whole. And so how then can we move forward to regenerate the health of an individual who may now be affected by ailments that are a result of poor food? And how can we restore a connection to the food system cycle? If we look at indigenous cultures, either those who were hunter-gatherers or agriculturally based, the efforts taken to produce a meal and maintain sustenance were depending on everyone's ability to participate in the process, whether it was from gathering or collecting or sowing or harvesting, processing, etc. And so I often ask myself, at what point did humanity's perception shift to believe that a lack of biological diversity and dependence on fewer farms would be a viable solution to feeding a growing population? And why then would we risk the survival of humanity through ecological devastation to further push this agenda? These questions I have asked myself repeatedly over the last decade, specifically when food production first came to my attention. 2 generations ago, our nation was reliant on one another to grow food in support of the war effort. And shortly after, convenience became a luxury and commodity appeared to be common practice. And so the boomer generation was raised on these ideologies and passed on to my generation, who I feel is now trying to really understand and mitigate the impact of these inherited behaviors, so that rather than digress any further than what we have, we can actually move forward. And I mentioned, the war effort and the gardens in that sense because personally, I've had multiple family members in every conflict going back to the revolution. And the commonality that these family members had wasn't just military service, but also farming and homesteading. And part of it had to do because that was the time period. They had to grow a little bit of food or raise a couple animals, but also because of the geographic location that they lived in. I didn't grow up on a farm, but my first memory is around the age of 2, when I was sitting in my grandmother's garden, right beside her tomatoes and her cucumbers in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And some of the more predominant moments of my life all involve animals and food. So in 2007, I was just getting out of the Marine Corps. I had served 3 deployments, 2 of those being to Iraq, had been wounded, was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress and had severe difficulties with the transitional process, from military life into the civilian sector, and was very close to becoming a statistic. And when I say that, I mean that right now, 22 veterans a day are taking their own lives. And that in itself is a pandemic. And that number has been increasing since 2007, which is really unfortunate. And so I have to ask myself, what more can I do? What can we do as a community, regardless of whether or not we served in the military, we served in combat, or if we believe in war, if we despise war, it doesn't matter. The fact that people are ending their own lives because they don't have a support network in place is really unfortunate. And I've had too many friends who have taken their own lives or drowned in a bottle. And that's really hard to deal with. And so shortly after getting out of service, I had met a buddy at a poetry slam, and told him that we were going to get a garden. And he said, you got to build raised beds. And I didn't really know what that meant. So I looked at a book, because that's what you did back then, and found out what raised beds were, and started to make them. And what was really fascinating was that when I first touched the soil, it was like there's an ancestral awakening into familiar territory that came from, from my lineage, and I didn't really know existed. And 11 years later, we have the operation that we have, and we've had the pleasure of working with close to 1,000 community members in just a very short period of time. And that is a very humbling thing. And it's not anything I ever expected to get into. And so, the discussion today is, agriculture as a mechanism for social regeneration. So what does it mean for farming to help with a community thrive? And how can we rebuild that connection that we've lost over 2 generations, and it's something I think about multiple times a day. How can we do this better? How can we have integrity and move forward? The unanticipated result of working the land for myself was enough to kind of fuel this almost I don't know, this craze, like to really understand things better, and to work with community members. And it's super stressful a lot of the times. It's not, it's not like you're just working with community and showing them things. There's a lot of prep work that goes into it. So it's very exhausting, but the end result is always just beyond words. We began working with college students back in 2015, and there was an article that was written on us from a local newspaper talking about how we had been working with veterans to kind of offer a space for them to relax and to be among their peers and to be in a safe space. And that prompted Middlebury College to reach out and to ask how they could help. And so automatically there was a broader community that was beginning to be established. And a lot of the students at Middlebury, they don't have firsthand experience with military service. Some of them that I've worked with, they have, brothers or aunts and uncles and other, family members who have served, but none of them specifically were in conflict or in military uniform. And so what was happening was they were meeting with myself and other veterans who might be present at the workshops and asking questions that they really didn't know that they had, because they hadn't really interfaced with people who had been over in conflict and returned from war. And I thought that was just a really fabulous thing to bear witness to. So anytime we had new student groups, I was reluctant at first to say, yes, I'm a military veteran, I served overseas. But I found that brought forward conversations which were actually vital to their time at school. And these are people who have long since graduated that we still keep in contact with. And some of them have moved on to work with veterans to various capacities. And that's really an incredible feeling. And so I'll talk about veterans a lot because that's really what I'm familiar with, even though majority of the work has been with high schoolers and college students, and some younger K through 8 groups. But being able to find a purpose after military service was difficult, but is rewarding beyond words. A lot of men and women, they may have been involved in very difficult circumstances at very young ages. They may have seen one of their friends get killed. And if that person was just 19 years old and they were only 20 or 18, it's just like, how do you process that information? you know, because the rest of the people back home don't really have a clear understanding of what it is young men and women endure while they are overseas, whether it's for 1 deployment or 10 deployments. It doesn't matter. You know, there's life circumstances that happen that you can't really, you can plan for all you want, but the impact of that moment is going to vary. And so a lot of the people that I had met back in 2014 who were interested in agriculture, the majority of them didn't have a whole lot of farming experience. And so they were looking for something that they could really invest their time and energy in. You know, farming can be very lonesome, but it can also be very community oriented. And so depending on what your operation looks like, there can be a really nice dovetail of like engaging with people, but then also being able to process, your own shit, like while you're in the field, which is very necessary at times. And so there was a push to talk about creating a chapter of the Farmer Veteran Coalition, which is a national nonprofit organization that was founded by Michael O'Gorman back in 2007, I believe. And the concept for this organization was that we are going to mobilize veterans to feed America, to help them find new purpose after military service, to support them to whatever means possible, so that way they can keep their feet on the ground and keep moving forward. And when I first became a member in late 2013, you know, there was, I think, only 5,000 or 6,000 veterans that were a part of the organization. There's well over 18,000 now, I believe the last time I looked. And that's a short period of time for that many military veterans to be engaged with farming. And the other side of this is that I don't know what the numbers are now, but you know, not too long ago, it was proposed that we need 1 million farmers in the next 10 years to take the places of the farmers that are already at retirement age or over it. And so with around, I think, 2 million servicemen and women who have gone in and out of Iraq and Afghanistan, a lot of them getting out of service and not really knowing what they're going to do next, this seemed like a super viable solution to have them continue to serve their country, to work with their communities. And then the other part is, you know, being, you know, kind of rebuilding their own mental health and vitality. And so shortly after this meeting, I had met with the acting agriculture liaison for Senator Sanders' office, Jenny Nelson, and a few other members of the Vermont farming community, Tom Youngman from Vermont Center Independent Living, and Kenny Smith, and a couple other people from UVM Extension, and we talked about what it would look like. And so at that point, you know, the VA kind of got involved, and I started getting pulled into all these discussions to talk about the impact of agriculture and veterans. And lo and behold, you know, Michael O'Gorman kind of, you know, gave us the green light to form a chapter, and we did. And Vermont became one of the first 4 chapters of the Farmer Veteran Coalition, and now I believe they're up to 12. I'm not engaged with the state chapter anymore, but was at the national conference back in November, and you know, the numbers there were just unbelievable, and that's a very humbling thing. So during my time with the Farmer Veteran Coalition as the founding chair, you know, we really worked to build partnerships with farm organizations on a state and regional level, so that they had a better understanding of the need for military veterans to get into service. The USDA has been a huge proponent of this organization and moving it forward for a long time now, which is great. But there's a lot of state and regional organizations that were unfamiliar. And so we reached out to High Mowing Organic Seeds, and you know, I applied for like a grant to get some packets of seeds so we can send out to local veterans. And it was only supposed to be 400 packets. And the woman found out what it was going to, and she said, hang on. And she came back a couple minutes later and with several boxes, and I counted them out, and there was 4,375 packets of seeds that I ended up sending to 22 veterans in 8 different states. And so that was a little bit of Vermont that we were able to spread. And there is also the Homegrown by Heroes labeling, which allows veteran farmers or veteran-owned operations to put a Homegrown by Heroes label on their product, except for meat. That's still kind of a difficult circumstance that meat producers are working through, but value added in veg can have the label. And so we worked with the Vermont Farm Bureau and some of the board members at the time to come up with this label. And we did a launch at the State House with the Agency of Ag, Food and Markets. And Vermont became the, I believe, 16th state to adopt this logo. And some veterans use it and some don't. There is a sense of pride, but I also think that there's a sense of concern too, because, Vermont's a very liberal state. There's a lot of conservatives as well, but I think that a lot of veterans are worried, have been worried in the past about what people will think about them being veterans and being a veteran-owned operation. It's not like it was in Vietnam where we were getting spat at or anything, but there's definitely veterans that I know in the state as well as in the nation who have had difficult conversations with people just because they had that logo, and I don't think that's right. And so the other part of that is that with there being a large misunderstanding of veterans and what it means to serve, that logo also helps there to be a conversation about what it means to serve and while in uniform and maybe in the farm field. And I think that's pretty spectacular. So a couple years ago, I stopped doing stuff with the state chapter and kind of focused on our own farm and building the community in our space. We still had a workshop series for veterans at the farm and reach out to other veteran farmers so that they could host the workshops and had really good success with it. So I'm glad that the veteran farmer movement is going on, but I haven't been involved with it as much recently. How's that so far, Rachel?
That's awesome, Jon.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Are there any questions coming in so far?
We have a comment from Mark Edsel who says, "Love you, Jon. Keep up the great work."
Mark. Yeah, so
I find that really fascinating. We've been thinking a lot about how building stronger and more resilient local food systems is such an important way of supporting our communities, and to be able to empower people who maybe aren't sure where to, how to get re-involved in community, getting veterans who are trying to re-enter and figure out how to be of service to their communities, coming from such a different experience than most people have had. I think it's a really interesting way to kind of create this like alchemy of healing that can happen while supporting community members in really cool ways. Mm-hmm.
For sure. And the really cool thing is that, veterans, not all veterans, but several experience traumatic circumstances. And though with the veteran, it might be more elaborate or heightened. I don't know if that's the word I'm looking for. But what I try to emphasize with the groups that we have coming here is that we are not the only ones that experience trauma. We are not the only ones that have to process difficult circumstances. And so using farming as a tool, using ecological design as a tool can really help you process information that is difficult. Post-traumatic stress is a real thing. And I think now more than ever, with this whole coronavirus thing, there's a lot of people who are experiencing post-trauma and they might not know how to process it. What I have really enjoyed but found frustrating is that there's a lot of organic seed companies that were sold out of certain things. And so that's fantastic, but makes it difficult for other people as well. But I'm glad that people are taking to their gardens, because I think that we can understand the fragility of the food system and where it's at right now. We can understand that larger monoculture operations are ecologically and they're not sustainable. And majority of the food that is growing on these operations here in the state, we don't consume. We don't eat the corn. And we may give the hay to our animals or use it as mulch, but a lot of that we don't eat. And maybe that feeds the cows who gives us milk, but I think that model, that monoculture, that really large operation is kind of on its way out. And I think that there's ways that we can lessen the divide between the hippie farmer and the more conventional dairy farmer, that's been around for 8-9 generations. I think there's value to both, but what we really need to be able to see is the likeness in each other and in our operations and our perception that can allow us to really like hone in and develop a bomb-proof, resilient food system that allows for larger growth, but then also diversity to support, wildlife habitat and ecological restoration, as well as healthy food for the community. I think now more than ever, we're really seeing the need to depend on local, and that's a great thing. I think it's unfortunate that if a pandemic was the cause of that, but I think it's really good that people are understanding that they need to rely on their neighborly farmer, for food and sustenance. So.
We have a couple questions that have come in. One of them is asking some questions about like how can someone find a farm that is run by a veteran in their area? Would that be through one of the the coalition that you mentioned?
Yeah, so the National Farmer Veteran Coalition in Davis has a database, and they really leave it up to the chapter chairs to kind of reach out to the farmers. The current chapter chair is Mark Bowen, and he and his wife Kate run Meadowdale Farms down in Putney. If you are looking to reach out to a veteran farmer, I'd try reaching out to them. And if you don't hear from them, reach out to the national office. Is there something specific? Are you looking to support the veteran farmer, or do you just want to meet them or see the operation? Or
yeah, the woman who asked, actually my mom, and she wants to know how she can support veteran farmers. And she's out in California, so it sounds like potentially reaching out to the coalition.
Yeah, reach out to David.
There would be good. Okay, yeah. Cool. Also, someone is wondering how do you get the produce that you grow to people? Do you do CSAs? Do you do farmers markets or sell directly to stores and restaurants?
I probably have the worst business model. I love giving food away. All right, so just to touch on our operation briefly, and then I'll go into answer that question further. We have implemented over the last 5 years several agroforestry practices. To the place that we have was pretty healthy to begin with, but we wanted to increase biodiversity, not just for food production purposes, but also for wildlife habitat and corridors. And so we have been gearing up over the last 5 years through rotational grazing processes with chickens and goats and ewes, to build the soil, to build the pasture, to build the biological activity in our tree crops, where we have, different types of oaks for acorns, black walnuts, hazelnuts, butterhearts, buttnuts, all these things, and then all these other fruit crops as well, everything from trees and shrubs. And we've worked on building the soil for annual production as well. So this is our first year where we are heavy on annual production, and that was intentional. We wanted to make sure we had a lot of the infrastructure in place before we started selling things. We've had a few sales over the years with restaurants and friends and community members, but nothing We haven't had a farm stand. That's getting ready to be built here within the next couple weeks. And so once we start popping produce out of the fields, it'll be going in there. We began raising pigs for the first time this year, and our pigs are rotationally grazed as well. You know, they're organically grain fed, and they get some really good food scraps, and they get apple cider vinegar every day to keep their gut health in check. And they're in the woods and rotation through the pasture. And so we will be offering pork here towards the end of the season. We got our piglets from Agricola Farms this round, and they are over in Panton, Vermont. The breed that we had gotten prior to these four were Mulefoot Mangalitsa cross. And those guys we got from Wild Roots Farm down in Connecticut, and that's another veteran-owned operation. They raise heritage beef and pork and chickens and turkeys. And so it's just kind of serendipitous how that all worked out, getting those piglets. But then we also have goats that we raise for meat as well. We have a Kiko breed, which their name in Maori from New Zealand translates to meat. And they are a really sweet breed to have around. And so, and I know, like, you know, there's ecologically, there's a lot of debate over the impact the meat industry has on the environment. And I think that is situationally dependent. If you have a very well thought out, you know, forest management plan and pasture management plan, and you understand the rest period and the grazing period, and parasite loads and all these things, and how big your herd is and how big of a herd you can have, you can kind of improve the quality of the landscape rather than degrade it. And I've watched songbirds, in the varieties of songbirds increase. I've watched the pasture grasses become more diverse. We do a lot of work to make sure that we don't degrade the landscape. We have minimal mechanical input. I have a very small 18 horsepower John Deere tractor, but everything else is done by hand, which is back-breaking labor. But we utilize limited to no tillage, cover cropping, cover crop cocktails, rotational grazing, silvopasture, a whole lot of different types of systems that work with the other. And because of that, we've, you know, our crops this year are going to be, you know, as long as everything goes well, pretty good, and they will be available on our farm stand. Next year, we'll likely do a CSA, but for the time being, it's just with everything else that we have going on, between raising a family, trying to homeschool through Zoom, build a home, other things going around the home front, you know, having to rely on annual crop sales is not really at the forefront. We have some other off-farm income that comes in, which is helping, but, you know, money is still tight, and we have to be mindful of how we spend what we have right now. So
that kind of ties into a question from Caitlin. She asked, how do you balance the need as well as time, effort, and resources to build and manage the land on your farm with the need and desire to be involved in the local and broader community?
Now more than ever, it's actually been very difficult. We usually by this time of year, we've already had several hundred people that have come through to participate in workshops, beginning of internships, volunteer work days. We get a lot of different student groups that that go out into the community, and so we have a really incredible partnership with UVM and Middlebury College. And all that's been squashed. And so luckily we got the perennials in 5 years ago. And so that's actually been able to be very helpful. The annuals, like I said, we've been building that for the last couple of years. And so my wife and I, in between everything else, are having to manage that. It's difficult. Now that things are loosening up, you know, restrictions are loosening up, we're going to be putting the word back out there for community to be engaged. We had to reschedule and then cancel our summer homestead weekend, and so now it's going to be a summer field days, and that will bring in some other people to kind of teach workshops and, talk about pasture management and agroforestry systems, soil building and medicinals that are available, in yards and out in the woods, provided that, it's allowed. It's really kind of difficult to navigate all this right now. We have a lot of community members, a lot of college students who they might come here for an initial visit, with a class or for a workshop, and they keep coming back. And it is something that I genuinely appreciate. And we get to know each other, and we become pretty close, and then all of a sudden they're family, and we trust them with our kids. And I think as much as it is a help to have them help out even just for an hour on the farm, it's really beneficial to them. I don't know how many times over the last 5 years I've had college students and veterans get in touch with me, say, hey man, I need to come out to the farm. It's just like, yeah, come on, we'll do something. It's like, you come here, we might lollygag a little bit, but for the most part, we're going to work on something, and it's not just to get free labor out of people by any means. It's because there's a process. There's something that happens when you are with another individual in the field working with the soil, that just creates this really incredible bond between you and the individual, but then that person or you and the landscape. We had a gentleman from Middlebury come out with a volunteer group, and he got in touch with me about a year later. And I think on the third or fourth visit, he told me that his dad had taken his own life, and we were able to bond over that moment, and I understood why he was coming out there, and that's what I like, because maybe you're only impacting one person at a time, but the impact on that individual is going to be something that they're going to remember for the rest of their lives, and that's what I think food is capable of doing. Going back to the introduction, hunters and gatherers and agriculturally based indigenous communities, they relied on each other, to survive. Everyone had a role and responsibility. And, if you didn't participate, you were kind of screwing everyone else. And so I feel entirely obligated to assist my community to any way possible, not just because it's good for me to be able to engage with people, but because I know that even if they're not talking about something that's going through them, you can always kind of see it when they're working on something. And the end result is always them having a large smile on their face and walking away and wanting to come back. And 9 times out of 10, they do. And so not being able to engage with the community through the last couple of months is difficult, because I think we're all craving it. I mean, we're social critters. We need to have that interaction with our community and our kin, and to not be able to do that face to face, is certainly difficult. With that being said, over the last couple weeks, we've been trying to figure out how we can engage the community in the state of Vermont, knowing that restrictions are being lifted on groups and everything. And so the pit we had purchased back in January, and that we've been raising throughout the winter, and we still have 3 left. One's getting ready to be processed here within the next couple of weeks. They've been fed by a few different community members and their families. And these are people that I knew, but never interfaced with on a regular basis. And in between compost pickup and drop off and exchanging of buckets, we've been able to build this really incredible relationship. And that came because of this pandemic. And they all have families. And it was really a beautiful kind of relationship pattern that began to occur. And so what I've been thinking of recently is how can, ways to re-engage the community on a small scale level. And what what we're coming up with is having a Families on the Farm program where we have a sign-up sheet where for certain hours throughout the day, families can sign up. They can come here with their families. We'll go over the whole social distancing protocol and make sure all of the precautions are in place so that there's a clear understanding of expectations, between one another. And then, it's not like they're just going to sit here and move mulch. But we're going to talk about why we're moving the mulch. What happens when you take that woody biomass that's been broken down over the course of 6 months that now has a thriving fungal community into it and has lesser carbon, and we're putting that around the trees to support the biological diversity in the soil and all these things. So it's a teaching moment. And that's really what I miss being able to do with students. And so to have families be engaged with the raising of a pig and to have them reap the benefit of this pasture-raised pork afterwards, which we didn't have to give them, but we wanted to because they participated in the process of raising that animal, is really a profound moment. And that's also led to them wanting to then invest further in the farm and our operation, which I think is great. But like I said, I'd rather give food away than sell it. And so the other component of this Families on the Farm program that we're designing right now is, they spend X amount of time on the farm doing tasks, right? And they accrue X amount of money towards produce or meat after the fact. And so that's one piece. The other piece is in our lower pasture area, that's primarily for community engagement, is that food that they work on, I'm not going to have them work on our family's personal garden plots, but be in the community space. The rest of that food will then be donated to Hope and Middlebury or to the food shelf, the local food shelf, with recipe cards and all of these other ways, so that way the food doesn't go to waste. So there's a way to engage with the community, to have them support the larger community that really fascinates me. And it's something that I've watched happen, and it's something that kind of really keeps me going.
That's awesome. And again, you've done a perfect segue into another question that someone has. Pamela asked if you know Mark Kimball from the Essex Farm across the lake, and mentioned that he has a lot of ideas about like multi-generational community potential for farming. I feel like you kind of touch on that with your Farms for Families?
Families on the Farm.
Families on the Farm program of getting families out there. And I imagine that would also inspire them to have a garden at their own house, even if they do continue to keep coming back and experience working and learning alongside you and your wife. But I know here in the Mad River Valley, there's been a lot of effort going into developing like a community victory garden. That is super tied into our food shelf. We have our first meeting on Friday to really talk about the logistics of it. I wonder if you could kind of speak to if you have any advice for people who are wanting to start something like this in their communities, whether a victory garden or just some other way of having a strong community-based garden or farm that gives back to its community, and what kind of key players they might want to look out for.
Sure. To touch on the first question, yes, I am familiar with Mark and Kristen Kimball over to Essex Farms, but I don't know them. I would love to know them. I have a friend, Meg Giroux, who runs Vermont Edible Landscapes and Interlace Agroforestry, who's over in that area. And so going to visit either or is an excuse to see the other. But I think that the intergenerational learning is huge. The last couple months, I've actually been helping an older gentleman at his lumber mill. And what I really appreciate about it is that generation is much, much different than my generation. And it's one that I have a great appreciation for, because it feels like home. It's just when you're there, it's just like you take your break at 9:30 for 15 minutes, you're back. Then you go and you have your lunch at 12:30 or 12, and you're back at 12:30. And it's just like, it's like the dinner bell rings and you stop doing what you're doing and you shoot the shit for a while. And it's just something that I feel like my generation and millennials just don't do nearly as much as they should. So the intergenerational learning and interfacing, I think, is extremely important to have, because there's things that we can offer and share with each other that'll be beneficial to the other. As far as starting a community garden, Well, I don't think that we've started a community garden, but have a very large communal component to our farm and homestead. Up in Lincoln, Vermont, near the general store, there is a very small little farm stand, and I love it because it's always being utilized. And the sign on it says, "Leave something, take something, take something, leave something," something along those lines. And so people drop off produce and other people take it. And I think that's a really great way to support the community. I think that if someone has space that they're wanting to offer, first check in to see if there's any restrictions on what they can do. I don't think there should be many if it's in a rural environment, but if it's in a more urban environment or more public space, in like a downtown area, you're going to need to check in with zoning and maybe have to go up against the select board to designate a certain plot of land. But I think if it's on your own property, there shouldn't be too much of an issue, putting the word out there to community members saying, hey, this is who I am, this is what I want to do, who's in, and have a meeting. I'm all about having meetings and interacting with people to see where everyone's at. One of my favorite courses that I took at Yes Tomorrow was with Bill Reed. It was Regenerative Development and Design. And one of the things that's always stuck with me is he said too often times people are trying to compensate, and rather than compensate, look to harmonize the circumstance or the situation. And that's something I always keep in the back of my mind, because it's like when you compensate for something, it's just like you're agreeing just to agree. But rather than look at difficult circumstances and figuring out, regardless of political ideology or your systems of belief, like finding ways where you can see the likeness of the other person or the other organization to move forward to support the greater whole. And I think that's really what it's about. Right now, I think that anyone who is interested in having a community garden or a community farm plot would be more than supported. I know that NOFA Vermont and High Mowing Organic Seeds and People's United Bank are having, they've been giving away free seeds for a couple weeks now. And Maddie Kepner from NOFA Vermont, she's the policy coordinator. She just put out another email the last couple of days asking who else wants free seeds. And so I'd definitely reach out to NOFA or to High Mowing. They have a really good community bin where you can go grab stuff. That's where I'd gotten stuff for the veterans previously. And if you have questions about logistics or how to organize people to get together, I would be more than willing to sit with you one-on-one or to kind of participate in the first meeting just to help kind of steer the path or to help you find ways to steer the path. I have a lot going on, but I think that this is another way for farming to be that mechanism. And I'm more than willing to support it and come over the mountain to help you guys out any way I possibly can.
That's wonderful. I don't have any more questions right now, but I do have a comment.
Sure.
From Mariah. She says, what an important and powerful message Jon is spreading about healing through the land while caring for our community. What a beautiful way to support our vets while also working towards sustainable communities. Thank you for leading this charge. Yes, yes, yes.
Thanks, Mariah.
So, some good feedback there. And then a question just came in from Ash. What do you recommend for the first few years of a farm? Like, what would the priorities be, or what were yours for the first few years of your farm?
One of the things that I learned in that ecological design course back in 2014 was a niche analysis. So understanding what your needs are and what they yield, and ideally the yield outweighs the need. But I think that if you have a plot of land, or even if it's, it's just a small garden plot, to really do like a comprehensive analysis and assessment of the space to figure out where the sun is, where the shade is, what the soil's like, if there's slope, what infrastructure currently exists, what's going on, to do soil tests and really understand what is happening. We do a lot of work with the Rubenstein School for Natural Resource and the Environment out of UVM, and there's always a design-heavy portion in the community partnership. And that's one of the first things we discuss is do a site analysis and assessment, get a base map of the area, and really take time to understand what's happening. You know, if there's super heavy rain, go out there and sit with it, because it's going to show you something that you may not have seen. If there's crazy wind during the winter time, you know, go out there and watch what's happening, because, you know, I mean, we don't, you know, we get a lot of snow and we get some really cold temperatures. And if you don't have a windbreak, you know, for a certain plot of land or for a building, then you might just lose your woodshed, and things like that happen, or your high tunnel. I don't know how many times I've seen high tunnels blow away. And, you know, so there's a lot of information to be gleaned from your site or from your plot of land. And then also like really understand like what you're capable of doing. I think is a really big thing. You know, it's really easy to bite off more than you can chew, or have all these incredible ideas, but not know how to implement them. And so if you begin to kind of put things on paper, you can kind of organize it appropriately and figure out what takes precedence over the other, which can be difficult, sure, because it's all really important, I think, when it comes to food. But ideally, you're allowing yourself to make mistakes and being okay with that, and making sure that those mistakes are not at a heavy cost, which can easily happen. And so just look at what you have, be willing to ask out for help, have someone come take a look at your site if you don't know what's going on, do your research, not just like YouTube, internet stuff, but like find books. There's a lot of really incredible information out there that you can engage with, and just go out and sit with the space and be with it. That I have to say that foremost, you know, just go be with the space.
Speaking of books, if you had to pick 3 books for someone to take a look at, if you have them off the top of your head, I'm curious what they would be.
I do. The first book I ever got is an introductory guide to permaculture. It was Gaia's Garden by Toby Hemingway. I bought that book right after we had our first garden in 2009, and it's a really introductory book to understanding, you know, ecological principles, and to understand like the basics of permaculture, or developing permanent agricultural systems with perennials and annuals dovetailed together. And I slept with that book beneath my pillow for probably about 2 years, seriously. And just kind of that became my guidebook. The second one is Edible Forest Gardens by Eric Tonesmeyer, or David Jackie and Eric Tonesmeyer, or Eric Tonesmeyer and David Jackie. I can't remember. I haven't looked at the book in a while because both of those are missing, and I'm really not happy about it. But that kind of goes in. There's two of them. There's volume 1 and volume 2, and one is really design heavy and the other species heavy. So understanding how to create these perennial food systems and how to design them, and all the things that Ash was just, you know, talking about, had a question about, you know, really accounting for the amount of information that's being presented on the site, and how to plan appropriately with that information based off of what your needs are. And then kind of like third and fourth is the Carbon Farming Solution by Eric Tonesmeyer, and Mycorrhizal Planet by Michael Phillips. And all of these books are through Chelsea Green Press. They have some really incredible literature out there. Gosh, we can keep going, because there's those are just kind of like food systems heavy, but then there's Street Farm, there's Farming While Black, there's a whole bunch of information out there about community and being engaged with the farm. And I've been working on a book for a while about, you know, veterans working on agriculture, and it's taking longer than I would like, because of everything that's going on around here, but eventually it'll get there, and hopefully you can pick that one up too.
That's awesome. I'm just going to put a little call out to everybody who's tuning in either on Facebook or Zoom. If you have questions, please ask them in the comments or the question and answer box. I know I've really been enjoying this talk a lot so far, Jon.
Thank you.
Yeah, farming and agriculture and having a connection to landscape, I feel like is for me personally, a very important part of how I stay grounded and move through the world. And I have never been a city person for good reason, but I do see a lot of friends who have been living in the cities or in less rural areas, feeling that desire coming from within to reestablish a relationship with the land. And I think that itself is a big thing that's going to help us regenerate our social landscape and build stronger communities that are more connected to each other. And having opportunities for communities to come together and get their hands in the dirt together, I think is one of the coolest and most satisfying ways to do that.
For sure. You know, there's something that's really incredible that happens when they are able to do it. And we've had people who grew up on farms in Nebraska here. We've had people from Chicago, students from Chicago, who have never touched the soil a day in their lives and really didn't know the process of producing a meal. You know, and just to have them get their hands dirty is really an incredible thing to watch. And sometimes they're squeamish, but you know, by the end of the day, they're willing to get in there with the animals and be with them. You know, and to like hold chickens and stuff like that. I think it's fascinating. And the other part of that too, and I don't know if I mentioned this in the intro, is that, you know, when you interact with healthy soil, there's bacteria in it that when it gets absorbed through your pores, it triggers a release in serotonin. And so it's like automatically you have these feel-good hormones and you're developing this connection with something that has been around for what, 14.3 billion years or however old the earth is. You know, it's a long time. And so it's you get to touch this part of the past that's existed, you know, well before you were here. And I think that's really an incredible feeling. And when people who have never been with the landscape before are capable of doing that, something shifts with them. And that's not anything that any one of us can do for another, but it's them having the opportunity to engage with the landscape that allows them to reconnect with it in a really special way. And that's why we do what we do. Everything here is focused on community, whether it's the community in the soil or the humans that come here to be a part of that. Everything is centered around community, and it doesn't matter what your political preferences or what your religious beliefs are. It's just if you want to learn and you want to, you know, understand how things work a little bit more, or you want to like teach a workshop, you know, we are very much open to that. And that's the other thing I want to talk about too, is that when we have workshops, it's not just me spitting and running my mouth for an hour or a day. You know, we bring in other people who do this better than I do, and that's part of expanding that community. You know, just earlier today, I had a veteran buddy who was asking about sheep. And he's an alum from the UVM Farmer Training Program. He's a vet. He has Headwaters Farm over in Heinsberg, and he's been working with vets in the past as well. And he's got a really cool operation going over there. And he was asking about sheep. And I was like, I got someone you can talk to, and he's going to work on getting some sheep from them. So it's just like we have these social networks. We have these connections that we make over, you know, space and time, and it's when we're able to offer those resources to other individuals, it's really cool, you know. And so I feel very humbled to be able to work with the community the way we do, because everyone has something to offer to the other. And I think that's partly Vermont, and that's partly the farming community, and that's also partly the veteran community as well. You know, we work to make sure the other can survive, and I think that's fabulous.
We have another question from Ash asking, what things do you wish you knew when you were starting out, or what are some tips that you would give someone who's starting out?
Gosh, I know this might not be the best answer, but I think knowing that it was okay to make mistakes with it. And keeping record logs, actually, that's a huge thing. Usually by the beginning of the season, I'll keep track of my seeding dates and all that stuff, but because there's so much stuff going on, and it's really right now just my wife and I, it's kind of hard to keep track of things as diligently as I should. And so if you know that the moon is in a phase and you need to work the soil, write that down and just write down the reactions to it, to the plant, to the soil, to everything that you do, because that's information that can influence the next decision that you have to make for that site or for that plant, or for the next season. So be okay with making mistakes, but be willing to learn from them, and learn from them by documenting your mistakes and successes. It's not all failure. So I hope that helps, Ash.
Ash said that was really good.
Good.
I just bought myself a new notebook so I could track more of my foraging and medicine making work, because otherwise you forget, you know. So
Yeah.
I think that's really great advice.
Good.
Awesome. Well, I don't have any other questions coming in right now. Do you have any, well, first, any last minute things you'd like to share with people? And also, how can people get in touch with you and stay connected?
Okay. As far as last minute shares is concerned, I genuinely hope that everyone is doing okay throughout all of this coronavirus pandemic. I know that there's a lot of difficulty with being apart from family and kin, and I know that people are being affected by it in different ways. One of the things that I've had to continue to tell myself is that, like, it's all going to be okay, you know, and maybe that works for some people, and maybe other people like, you're crazy, Jon. And sure, maybe, but I think that, you know, you do get what you put out there. The universe, I feel, is capable of providing for us what it is we need in order to move our lives forward. I have often thought about why it is I came home when others didn't. And that's something that has bugged me for a long time. But I think that individuals who have persevered in the face of trauma, whether it was war related or anything else, are more capable of being functional persons in community, in society, once they have the tools to kind of look at their experience from a different perspective. And for me, a lot of those tools were ecologically, agriculturally based. And I think that has made all the difference in the world for my own person. Now, everyone else is different, and maybe there will be some similarities, but the reality is we have to find our own niche, and what it is that we enjoy, what it is that challenges us, and what it is that we can do without. You know, I believe in forward motion. I believe in forgiveness and being able to move forward. And I think that's the only advice I have. The other one is, like, don't be afraid to take off your shoes and put your feet in the soil. You know, if you're living in an urban environment, just make sure there's not lead in the soil. But you know, just get your hands dirty. Like, that's legit. Get those feel-good hormones moving throughout your body, because it makes a difference. I am known to just stop and smell the ground at random moments, just because there's something that happens chemically in my brain that makes a bad day so much better. As far as getting in touch with me, we do have a website. It's www.wildrootsfarmvermont.com. I don't have Facebook anymore. I got rid of that almost 2 years ago. But we do have Instagram, and the Instagram is Wild Farm VT, at Wild Roots Farm VT, and it has this logo. which was designed by Morgan from Ice House Farms. They raise goats down in Ripton and have some really incredible dairy products. So go check them out. They have some fun. They have some fun merch and really good food. My email address is wildrootsfarmvt@gmail.com. I do my best to update the website. It's a little bit behind, but you can see some of the previous workshops that we've done. You can see kind of like, I don't know what the plans are for the future, but a lot of those got, smashed back a couple months ago. So I got to take those down. But the other piece of advice I will tell you real quick, I was thinking about this the other day, is make sure you protect your soil. Like that's legit. There's millions of forms of life in a handful of soil. Just take care of them, treat them as livestock, feed them well, keep them alive, build a really robust bacterial and fungal community, because that really is your immune system for the plants. Rain falls anywhere between 20 and 25 miles per hour, which may not seem very fast, but when you have a heavy volume falling at that rate for prolonged periods of time, especially now with, shifting weather patterns, that is going to have a huge impact on your food system and your soil. So protect your soil, mulch it, put in some wood chips, put in some hay or straw, add compost, amend it, compost tea. There's so many things that you can do, and there's so much information out there. Protect your soil, because that is what keeps your food system resilient.
I think that would make a good t-shirt too, protect your soil.
We're working on it. We have our t-shirt. And we're going to be putting some funky slogans on them. I had my kids do some drawings. My oldest boy, he did one of a broad fork, and it says "Get Loose" on it. And then my youngest, he did one of a carrot and with a happy face on it. So for happy carrots, so we're working on that. The merch is coming out. Obviously that got put on hold too because of the whole coronavirus thing. But, as much as I like to give food away, we are, a business as well. And so, if you feel like supporting us in any way, shape or form, that would be great. But, if you're coming by and you need some extra food, I'd be more than willing to give it to you. That's just kind of how we run. I like to barter things. I love the barter economy. I think that's a really good direction for our community. But yeah, just be happy.
Well, thank you, Jon. This was great and feels like a very timely conversation to be having too. I added all of your contact information into the group chat. I'll also post it on the Facebook page so people know how to get in touch with you. And next week, same time, same Zoom link, we have Eddie Murma, who is working with kids doing youth design build here in the Mad River Valley with the Sculpture School of Vermont. So I feel like that also ties in nicely with the conversation about getting intergenerational work together, but how can we help to encourage creativity, curiosity, and play in kids, which all those things apply when you're working and getting to know your land as well. So I hope folks will tune in for that. I also just wanted to mention, you did touch or say that your favorite class at tomorrow was the Regenerative Development and Design with Bill Reed. Yes. That one I have been wanting to take so bad, but it wasn't available last year. But we have it scheduled for September. So I'm personally hoping that I'll be able to touch into that because Bill Reed is up to some really cool stuff in the world. So
he is really incredible.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. So just throwing that out there to everybody. If you want to take a really awesome class, it's September 18th to 20th, and hopefully we'll all be able to gather, maybe with masks and distance still, but that would be really cool. You can check that out on Tomorrow's website. Yeah, I think that's all. I received a couple thank yous from folks on Facebook. Really grateful that you were able to take the time from your busy farming schedule to talk with us about this, Jon.
It was a pleasure, and I'm incredibly honored to have been able to participate in this way. And if anyone who is listening in wants to swing by and check out the operation, we can let's figure something out, because I like people to see how food works on this level. The homeschool agroforestry, I think, is a really good direction, and I just thank you again for tuning in for a little bit, and I hope that you have a good weekend and grow some really good food and have a good time with this with everything that's going on as best possible.
Awesome. All right. Well, I guess that's that.
Super.
Have a good rest of your evening, John. And thanks everybody for tuning in. Bye.
Thank you.